So thank you for joining us. I think this is based on what I've seen of the DataWorks conference. It seems like a lot of our projects involve collaboration with people in a lot of different disciplines. And so we have a wonderful panel today to be able to talk to us about some strategies for how to incorporate collaboration and to really get the most out of our interactions with all of the people that we're working with. So first, let me introduce our four panelists. So Dr. Sarah Burke is a scientific test and analysis techniques expert for the Stat Center of Excellence. She works with acquisition programs in the Air Force, Army, and Navy to improve test efficiency, plan tests effectively, and analyze the resulting data to inform decisions on system development. Some of you may have seen Dr. John Hammond's talk on Monday on warhead fragmentation events. He's a statistician at the Institute for Defense Analyses, where he develops methods and tools for analyzing test data. He has worked with a variety of Army, Navy, and Air Force systems, including counter-UAS and electronic warfare systems. Currently, John is providing technical support on operational testing for the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Dr. Willis Jensen works in industry and is part of the HR analytics team at W.L. Gore, working on projects across the enterprise related to people data. Previously, he worked as a statistician in diverse business areas in new product development, quality control and testing, manufacturing, supply chain, and marketing. On Monday, Dr. Pete Parker talked about statistical engineering in practice, and today he's on our panel. He is the team lead for the Advanced Measurement and Data Systems branch at NASA Langley Research Center, and he frequently serves as an agency-wide statistical expert in test and evaluation methods and anomaly investigation. So we've got, as you can see, wonderful representation from lots of different areas. And I know personally that these folks are really good at what they do and working in collaborative environments. So let me just talk a little bit about what we're planning for the next 75 minutes. So first, we'll talk a little bit just about what ideal collaborations look like, and that'll be a chance for all of our panelists to sort of introduce themselves and sort of tell us what they think an ideal collaboration looks like, and then talk a little bit about preparation. So the motivation for good collaborations and what we can get out of it, and then what we can do in terms of training ourselves to really be ready for those opportunities and make the most of it. We'll have a little break then where we'll address some questions from the audience. So please type your questions into the question and answer window, and we'll try to address those as we go. And then the next block, we'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of being successful in collaboration. So how do we actually make those interactions go well? Another pause for some questions from the audience on that theme. And then lastly, we'll have some final questions or sort of final thoughts on diversity and challenges. We know that collaborations don't always go smoothly, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll open it up for more questions from the audience. And if you have some comments that you'd like to say, as Rebecca mentioned, we can do that and have that opportunity at the end. So that's what lies in store for us. And I think our panelists will have some excellent wisdom to share with us. So first, we'll give all of the panelists a chance to say a few words. So what does an ideal collaboration look like? And what's the best experience you've had and what made it so successful? So John, would you like to kick things off and share a little bit about what ideal collaboration has looked like for you?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I can share a few tidbits on this. I think there's a lot to unpack in this question. It's deep and broad. I'll give you a few things. I think that it's very important to have a clear vision of success in a project. You know, projects are very, very long, and I think they benefit from checkpoints or sub goals. I also think leadership is very important in long and difficult projects. And so I think leadership attributes are up there too. Of course, you cannot sort of you can't have too many goals. I think there's a risk in sort of setting yourself up for failure. So you have to give people flexibility. There's a happy medium, but goals are still very useful. I think teams work well when you bring together a diverse set of people with different backgrounds and in an environment where people can be open with each other about what their skills are and about what their deficiencies are. I think that that's very, very important. When people know who's an expert in what and who's not, then projects tend to go better. And I think there's diminishing returns associated with having too many people with the same skill set on a project. So I think it's important to foster environments that are inclusive and where people can kind of be honest about what they think they can do and what they don't think they can do is really important. I had the pleasure of having a really good collaborative experience in counter UAS evaluation. This was a big project where we did a whole lot of systems evaluations for counter UAS systems over the course of about a year. We evaluated 11 systems that I'll say under strange circumstances. And I think that we had a diverse set of people, we had strong leadership, and we have sort of had clear goals and endpoints. And I think that it went very well. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that diversity on teams really feels like it is the key ingredient. Sarah, any thoughts on ideal collaborations?
Yeah, thanks. So like Christine mentioned, I work for the Stat COE, and if anyone's not familiar with the Stat COE, we're an organization funded by OSD, specifically DTE&A, to help support DoD acquisition programs with test planning, strategy, design, and analysis. The reason I bring that up is because basically I'm an outside consultant that's a free resource to the programs that I support, which can make collaboration surprisingly challenging, at least for us sometimes, because we are somewhat outsiders, right? We want to be a part of the team, but we're not located with them. I mean, everybody's working remotely now, but ordinarily with these teams, hopefully you'd be co-located, you're in kind of the regular battle rhythms, and that's not what I experience. So I think what John said in terms of ideal collaboration of having, a clear vision, for me, it's also having everybody buy in and everybody is kind of in a cohesive team. So we're all together. So one of the collaboration is most successful for me as part of the Stat COE, where someone comes to me and asks for help, right? So I've already got the buy-in from them where they really want to have us part of the team and help them collaborate and come to a successful outcome. So I'd say my most successful experience so far has been a Navy system that I have been working with. It's still ongoing, so we'll see how it ends. But so far, we had one of the colleagues I'd worked on a different part of the system reach out to me with a program representative where they wanted some help with some simulation, and they believed design of experiments would be needed. So he called on me to help them out. And we just ended up having a really good, the right mix of people. So we had the live system experts, we had the simulation and model experts in these teams, we had the program representative, and we had myself, and we also had the operators that would execute the simulation. We had weekly meetings with clear goals outlined for them, really productive conversations to help answer all the questions needed. So in the end, we ended up with a clear design and a test strategy to go forward. And so it ended up being as we had the right people in the right room with an agreed upon objective that we documented, and we also had a timeline that we were all working towards. So I think the documentation when you're working with a team and regular check-ins and communication, even if it's a weekly meeting or checking in via email, phone calls, is what made it so successful. So it did never drop from anybody's radar, right? We were always thinking about it and moving forward each way.
Yeah, it sounds like if you're not fighting the logistics, then a lot of things get easier. So Pete, any thoughts?
Yeah, hopefully my audio is working all right. Thumbs up. Good. Yeah, I thought about this question, what does it look like? And I thought about from what perspective? I think externally, a great collaboration People see that the team members are engaged, they're productive, they're mutually respectful. And then from each team member's perspective, I think, you feel like your contribution's being valued. You feel like you're being challenged technically and relationally in a good way. And it's very rewarding. So that's how I would kind of describe, the ideal collaboration from both. One of the best experiences that I had was working on a hypersonic air breathing propulsion system, a scramjet engine. And I was part of a multidisciplinary team of highly committed, talented people. I mean, these people came to NASA to solve this problem. So they were fully engaged. And it was a really hard, complex problem. And successful implementation was years off. There was not going to be any near-term, feeling of gratification. It was going to be chipping away at this really hard problem. And we had to revel in every little incremental, achievement that we had. And we all individually knew it was that hard. And I think that's what made it, that we needed each other. Not one person had the solution. Nobody even thought they had the solution. And as I look back, I think one of the most successful aspects of it was the leader. John mentioned leadership. And I think leadership has a lot of different perspectives, but particularly for collaboration, the leader is somebody, in this case, who was a technical expert in the field, but he had a really healthy measure of humility. And I think daunting, complex problems tend to give you that pretty easily, humility. And most importantly, he was really appreciative of every person on the team, multiple experience levels, multiple disciplines. And I think he really sought to draw out the best of everybody, and not just individually, but to draw it out in that full team collaboration. And he basically modeled what he wanted to accomplish. And, I think the team leader is absolutely critical to successful collaboration for all the things that I've just said. And it can't be a team leader who's already got a solution in mind and the rest of the team's there just to bolster it. They need to ask lots of questions, give everybody a voice. And one thing that, I've learned through the years is one way to do that is to appoint a team lead who is technically competent and confident, but is a little bit removed from the task or the problem at hand, so that they don't have that strong presupposition or solution. And I can tell you that can be really counterintuitive. That's not the way teams are generally built. And it can be uncomfortable for the person being asked to lead. And I can tell you that from personal experience. When you don't really have the answer and you have to get everybody engaged. And so I think that, when I look back, leadership was a very successful element, a key element to the success of that collaborative team.
Thanks, Pete. I think we've all been on a team where the answer was already in an envelope, and that's a really frustrating way to go through a collaboration. So that's great. Willis, thoughts?
Thank you, Christine. And I'll just start by just sharing that I might be a little bit of an outlier with the group, and not being part of government, and maybe give a little bit different perspective from industry. But in spite of the differences in the backgrounds, collaboration, the success factors in the collaboration, or what it looks like, we'll have some commonalities and similar patterns in there. A couple of ways that I measure the success of an ideal collaboration. One is, did it achieve an outcome? Did it actually successful in accomplishing that goal, which is certainly a way to do that. But it's not just that, it's also in how that outcome was achieved. And the way I like to think of it is would I sign up for it again? And with the people who are on that collaboration, would they be willing to repeat the experience or to do it again? Or was it something like, oh, I'm never doing that again? And if you have a successful outcome and people enjoyed it and had a good experience, it was a positive experience, not necessarily that it was easy, as Pete was mentioning, sometimes they're hard or challenging, but that's where it gives us motivation, and we want those experiences to grow and develop and learn and to be challenged. And so I'm not just saying that it's an easy experience, but it's something that you would sign up for again because you got something out of it as part of it. When I think about different experiences I've had, one that kind of came to mind in terms of a successful collaboration was one where I was actually a project champion. I was a team of individuals, and most of the team I had never even met before we started the project. And we were trying to develop a consistent terminology and training course around test methods. And we had people from different areas, divisions and time zones and parts of the world. It really was a global team in different languages and all of that. So there were many different ideas and perspectives that everybody had as about what's the best way to do this training, what's the right terminology and the approach and everything that we should do in there. But we were successful, and when I think about some of those success factors, it was similar to what's already been shared by others, in that there was this sense that we were all in this together. We weren't competing. We were all on the same team, working toward the same goal. The goal was clearly defined. We had the right scope, and it was a manageable scope to complete the project in the timeline that we were given. There was also a willingness to challenge ideas. We had a couple of members on the team that I think were our kind of most valuable people because of the questions that they asked. And they were able to do it in a way to say, hey, have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? And it really helped the team to kind of challenge some of the different assumptions and ideas and perspectives, and help us to kind of come to a consensus in the problem solving that we were doing. And then finally, we had a dedicated time. In this particular case, we made some travel investments so that we could spend time together in person, and we would get together and lock ourselves up in a room for 3 days and really hammer something out. And I think it's going to be interesting. This was all pre-COVID, and I think it's going to be interesting after COVID to see is that kind of effort going to go away, or is it going to be harder to do that type of thing? And I'm interested to see how that evolves, and the ways that we can still kind of have that dedication or focus time where you don't have other meetings or other distractions. And we're in this remote world, and that might be a little more challenging in the future. And I hope that there's still a place and a time and a space to be able to get you together in the same room and spend that dedicated time where you can look each other in the eye and talk and really dedicate to it. So those are some of the success factors that I really saw with that particular project, and similar success factors for other projects as well.
Great, thank you, Willis. And I'm with you that I hope we get some face-to-face time back for our collaborations, because it sure makes a difference, particularly early on. All right, the second question, focusing a little on the preparation, is just maybe articulate a little bit about what the need for collaboration is in our work. And so Pete, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, well, I can answer it in one word: complexity. Technical, organizational objectives, multiple competing objectives, cost, resources, time constraints, and often probably starting in a bit of a mess. Trying to recover from sort of where we are. And, I think that those types of problems are the ones where you can't really break them down into individual pieces and delegate out those parts and then get everybody to solve their piece and bring it back together and glue it together. These are systems that, maybe we can't predict what they're going to do. I mean, maybe they're emergent behavior. Maybe the behavior is not fully understood. And so in those cases, multidisciplinary teams and collaboration it's not just, required, it's demanded. A previous branch head once told me a saying that I think of often. He said, if you're working on a problem that you can solve sitting at your desk, then you're not working on the right level of problem. These are ones that you can't solve by yourself, whether you want to or not. And, when I think about those problem characteristics across our organizations, particularly national defense and aerospace research, these are the kind of challenges we have. And I know there's a lot of focus on high performance computing. And I think that's maybe put forward as an enabling technological panacea. But I think there should be a strong focus on another kind of HPC that I'll call high performance collaboration. And, no matter how advanced our computing resources or any of our tools, I think the collaborative teams are what's going to be required to strategically apply all those resources and realize impact. And, you know, in my opinion, I think some high performance collaboration could do a lot of things for efficiency in our organizations, and maybe even mitigate some of the demands for high performance computing by defining the right problems, the most impactful questions, efficient analyses, insights that only humans can sort of bring in a highly collaborative, innovative way to interpret those results. And, you know, I'm not opposed to machine learning. I just got to throw that out, right? But I'm really jazzed about human learning, human innovation. And I think that's a product of a very successful collaboration. You know, you can call me a bit old fashioned, but I recognize what we accomplished at NASA over 50 years ago with high performance collaboration by putting a man on the moon. And we didn't have anything that looked anything like high performance computing to do that. So, you know, I think those are some of the things that motivate the collaboration. And I think that, you know, it's essential to the key to all of our organizational successes. It's people solving problems collaboratively.
Great, that was really well said. Thanks, Pete. John, thoughts to add?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what Pete said. The story over at IDA and DOT&E is much the same. So we work on highly challenging, highly complex problems. And just to give everyone kind of a rough idea of what we do, so we design operational tests of military systems. We try to make them as realistic as possible. But of course, we can't go to war just to collect data. So we have to do the next best thing and try to figure out, you know, what's the most realistic we can do for any given system. And it's different for everything. And you only get one shot at it. And so the way I kind of describe it to my friends is we're out to kind of collect some of the most expensive and most valuable data in the world. And from that data, we have to produce a consumer report, so to speak, of the system's suitability and effectiveness. So you need a lot of different people to actually, get this done. And just like, if you're even the smallest projects that we do with one person, it's not just a one-person project. That person is supported by a team of people. That person is supported by editors. That person is supported by people who check her work, bounce ideas off of. Even individual projects are collaboration. But primarily in our work, we need statisticians to design our tests. So we can all pat ourselves on the back for that. We need warfare experts to tell us what matters when we're looking at a system. We need psychologists to figure out which human factors constructs are most relevant for every test we do. We need cybersecurity experts to tell us which parts, how do we sort of design the cyber test. And we need editors to check our reports. There's a huge list of people, and it's just like Pete said, it's not that everyone can carve out their little bit. Everybody needs to be in sync during the project. And that's how things get done smoothly. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can try to add a little bit, but wow, Pete and John really hammered home a lot of really good things. I think I'll branch off a little bit about what John was saying about kind of you have the diversity of experts, right? When you're in these teams, particularly in helping to design and test these defense systems. And so, you have a T&E expert, you have the subject matter experts, the system experts, the resource planners like Pete brought in, because that is a huge logistical aspect, right? When you're planning these very complex tests for a complex system. And at least from the stat COE perspective, a lot of programs don't necessarily have a stat expert to help them do this efficiently. So being able to come in and help collaborate with all the experts so that we can all actually work towards a common goal, right? Which is the whole idea of collaboration. Everybody has a common goal, which is a hard thing to define in itself, right? That's a big need for it. And I would say on top of the complexity side of it is the stakes that are involved, right? So a lot of these systems are going to be used by operators in the field, and they need to work, like they're supposed to. And so you want to make sure the testing and the evaluation of that is done correctly and efficiently, right, effectively. And that's where you need the collaboration to come into play. And kind of the pulling in Pete's part as well of the innovation, right? I'm a stat expert. I can help you design an experiment. I can help ask questions, but I'm definitely not an expert in these systems myself, right? And so any solution I come up with is not going to be as good a solution if I'm not talking with all of these subject matter experts. So it really is, the sum of all the components is greater, right, than all of the parts individually. So I think that's where the collaboration side becomes critical to come up with the unique solutions that'll get you to a successful outcome.
Great, thank you. So just before we jump to the next question, any parting thoughts on this one? I feel like we've been pretty thorough in tackling that. All right, the next one, I know a lot of our training is sort of on statistical tools and sort of getting us technically up to speed, but are there some things that would have been helpful to have as you were getting started with all of this to prepare you for collaborations, just to make those first encounters with interdisciplinary teams go smoothly? Willis, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking back to kind of my first week on the job as a statistician in a new area, fresh out of school, optimistic about being able to solve all the problems and whatnot, and then kind of getting into reality and whatnot. But one of the things that really stands out to me, even like many years later, was one of the manufacturing leaders, and I was kind of helping support a manufacturing line, and the manufacturing leaders arranged for a personal one-on-one tour of the manufacturing clean room. So, I mean, if you picture kind of the old ET movie, I mean, I had to gown up and bring a white hazmat kind of suit and everything. It wasn't just an easy thing to do. I had to schedule time when it wasn't disrupting manufacturing and all of this stuff, but was able to just walk through the processes and ask all the questions that I wanted to ask about what he was explaining what was going on. And after doing that, of course, I wasn't an expert in that process, but I had seen the process and I had seen the equipment and seen how they were doing things and whatnot. And so it gave me a language, and it gave me just enough of an understanding to help as a statistician. So when they were talking about, what are those hard to change factors? Well, I knew what those hard to change factors were. And when they were talking about sample size and how they were collecting the data, I had seen the product and how they were doing the testing on it and what it meant to take multiple samples on the same thing versus or multiple tests on the same sample or other types of things. So it really just was so valuable to just be able to have that and see the process and understand the language and learn the language. And it really just facilitated all of the collaboration afterwards. And because we were speaking the same language, and the communication was much more effective, and I knew better some of the questions that I should be asking and some of the things that they should be thinking about as we were setting up tests or setting up experiments and everything as part of that process. So that's what I was just saying, whatever it takes so that you can understand the language and communicate effectively.
No. So I will say I never turn down a chance if someone offers you a tour. I mean, just the things when you can visualize them, it changes everything about your understanding of things. Sarah, any thoughts?
So I was definitely one of those fresh out of grad school with very limited experience, and here I am working with complex defense systems that I knew nothing about, and I had no military background, right? So when I first started, there were only about 5 of us at the Stat COE, and one of my colleagues said that the biggest part, or a very large part of our job, isn't creating the designs, it's the psychology aspect to it. And so like understanding how to effectively interact and engage with the customers and the clients that you're going to work with. And that was a piece that you don't learn, right? So you don't learn these types of soft skills or how to effectively communicate with different clients. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I wish I'd sort of recognized it sooner, was that you have to adjust the way you communicate depending who you talk to, right? So if if I'm in a working group with other engineers, subject matter experts, you're going to talk a certain way, and knowing how to frame that and define things to effectively communicate. Whereas if I'm going to go communicate now with the program manager or the chief developmental tester, my entire approach is going to completely change to make it an effective communication. And when you're in a collaborative environment with a team that has the higher level stakeholders along with kind of the working level, it's really important to be able to adjust your communication so that you're speaking the same language essentially. So I kind of wish we emphasize that a little bit more when you're just starting. And I think it's a little hard to practice, but being able to just sit in on meetings or go to meetings with a colleague that has that experience, and you can kind of see who's who and how do you adjust, would have been even better for me. Another part is from the stat side of it is eliminating the jargon as much as possible. One of the things that we teach a bunch of short courses now, and you realize that the same word has different meaning across all the different fields, right? So something even as simple as parameter means something or different, right, to everybody. And so practicing not speaking technically and in that jargon. And the same would be true for the subject matter experts you work with and practicing that. I got a little bit of practice that because I did an internship with Christine actually before I graduated, but I think anytime you can practice it in an onboarding situation is going to be really helpful. And then the last thing I'll throw out there, particularly with people without the defense background, and this we actually did in my onboarding, is my colleagues, half of them are about half of them are former military, retired military. So they actually gave me some military 101 lessons, right? And some of it was very basic, right? Like, how do you not know this? But like, I did not know certain things about, the military. And so having just some basic background so you know more about who you're going to be working with and talking with was really helpful just from a confidence level, so that I felt like I knew what I was talking about.
That's great. Thank you. And John, any things to add?
I agree with a lot of what Sarah said, and I think actually IDA does a really good job of onboarding new hires, or at least they did before COVID when I started. I'm sure the current process is pretty good right now too. And it's very easy for new hires to get involved in a lot in different projects. We like to say that working is kind of like a choose your own adventure. You kind of, to some extent, you have some freedom to work on what you think is interesting. And IDA has a rather flat hierarchy for the staff. So it's very easy to talk to people on the same level. And so I think IDA does a lot of good things there. In terms of what could be done better, not necessarily at IDA, but at lots of organizations. I'll go back to, focusing on, I think we should think about fostering a culture of inclusivity. I think that we should think outside the box and try to be creative about making new hires feel pretty comfortable when working in an organization. And the reason I bring that up is because kind of like what Sarah said, I think communication and people skills are kind of undervalued by technical people, especially by technical people who are used to working independently, like during a PhD, for example. So when you come and you work in government or in business, you have to acquire a lot of team skills and people skills and communication skills, and a new kind of writing skill. And so you learn that just because you're the smartest person in the room, which I'm not, but your ideas are garbage if they're not communicated effectively. It's the well-communicated ideas that kind of float to the top. And new hires don't know that necessarily. So I think we need to have a good culture to kind of make people comfortable in expressing themselves. I also think that technical people tend to undervalue their contributions to complex projects, kind of like an inverse Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's kind of another reason that I'd like to figure out how to make people more comfortable. I think there's a lot of benefits that we could reap. Not that IDA necessarily does a bad job of this, but I think it's something a lot of organizations could think about. Back to you.
Great, thank you. And this is sort of our first moment to pause for questions, and right on cue, one of them has come in, so let me read it to you. One of the big initiatives in DoD test and evaluation is integrating various phases of test, e.g. integrating DT and OT. From your perspective and experience, what are some of the things we can do better in our collaborations to be more successful in those integrated tests? So I'll throw that out to any of you guys, if you want to jump in now.
I'd love to jump on that, and at least just say one tidbit. I think a big problem with integrating different test organizations is people just don't know who's in charge. I think that we have to delegate authorities to do different things. And I think there has to kind of be, I think that has to be made clear to people. And I think that that can go a long ways. And so who's in charge is not always made clear. And if we can make it clear, then it's very helpful.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just add that it goes a little bit with what John was saying is, so I have the DT background. I think John has more of the OT background, right? So we need to meet in the middle ourselves, right? But I think related to that is you tend to have a lot of test planning or collaborations going, in silos, right? Everybody's working on it in one, like I'm doing this thing over here, I'm doing OT over here. And I think partly because you don't know who the players are in between, it can be really hard to foster the initial communication and the just kind of the meeting of the minds in the same room. And I think one of the things that we really do need is to be able to meet in person in the same room so that you can be face to face. I think one of the challenges, particularly with the integrated testing and trying to make that more successful, is coming to an agreement on common objectives, right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges I think that I've seen between a DT objective versus an OT objective. And so being able to maybe compromise and work towards a common goal would make or facilitate better solutions on that integrated level. And I mean, that's the key part of a successful collaboration, like I mentioned before, is that you have the same goal. And I think that's the challenge right now, is how do we get the common goal between DT versus OT so that we can meet in the middle. I'm open for any of the other panelists to figure out how to solve that.
Yeah. So I think it's probably all about just asking like how will we know when we're successful, and then how do DT and OT actually sort of fit into that overall success. And I think Sarah, you touched on that sort of this bigger picture perspective of how do we know we're making progress to what's really important. That feels like if everyone is thinking along those lines, then I think getting the pieces to align maybe gets a tiny bit easier. So, all right, as anticipated, our time is zooming by, so maybe I'll keep us moving. So the next segment, you'll remember, is all about the process. I think I jumped ahead here. And so we'll now think a little bit about deciding on who should be included in a team and how do we form those multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary collaborative teams. So Sarah, do you want to get us started on this one?
Sure, I'll definitely hit that first part too. So one of the things that we recommend, particularly for defense T&E planning, who should be involved, right? So you want your subject matter experts, you want the system experts for sure. You want the operator who's actually going to be testing this thing, right? So you can get their perspective of, no, we can't do that. Yes, we can. You want a test and evaluation expert, right? Because they're going to have years of experience of how do you test certain systems. You want people that are actually going to be on the test range, right? You want them involved in these conversations so that you don't get surprised later on when you find out they can't, test the way that you've come up with this amazing test design, right? But I think what happens a lot that gets overlooked is you definitely want a program representative and a stakeholder right there, particularly at the beginning, right, to help kick it off so that there's a clear vision. And I forgot to say, you also want the stat person, right? Don't neglect the statistician until the very end, right? So I think the challenge is you want these people there from the start, right at the beginning. So you're all working together from the get-go. And having a program representative and a clear stakeholder to say, here's what the final outcome should, tend to look like. You might not know what the way to get there, but having a common vision. I've worked on several teams where it just seems very meandering, right? And it's not clear what our goals are, and we don't have a leader, right, to say here's the outcomes that we need, or here's the kind of the vision. The one caution I'll make, which I think can tend to happen, I don't know if this happens in industry, so maybe Willis can chime in later, but you kind of want the Goldilocks size team, right? So not too big, not too small, just right size. So I've been in some meetings where it's like we've just got like 3 people and we clearly are missing, right, subject matter expertise that we just don't have. But I think I've been more often in the case where we have way too many people, right? And you really want to get that core team of experts, right? Where you've got all the different perspectives, but you don't need 40 people maybe on these teams, right? When you start to get that large, maybe that's when you start kind of dividing it down or decomposing into smaller problems, smaller teams. So that would be my first start of getting a team and kind of right sizing it.
Yeah, John, I think talked earlier about sort of diminishing returns if you have too many people with the same expertise, and just group dynamics change a little bit. So Pete, things to add to that?
Yeah, I think Sarah hit some great points, and so I'll add a few things, a little different perspective. I think collaborative teams need a mix of technical competence and personal soft skills, and maybe that's stating the obvious, right? We need to seek team members that can and want to work together. Can and want, that's both. Technical competence is absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient. And team members organizationally need to be incentivized to work together and focus on team success instead of sort of individual glory. And that mix of personal, skills and technical competence, you can think of ends of the distribution of that. A really happy team that's stupid is not going to provide high quality results. Just not. But then again, a team that's full of brilliant people who are so cantankerous that they can't even work together because they're just trying to outdo each other, that's not going to work either, right? So there's got to be that mix, that balance. And, I think that if the team is not working together in personnel skills, I think we revert back to this old Army recruiting slogan that I've remember hearing, an army of one. That can't be, the people that you want on this team. So there's definitely that balance. And I think one thing that I've found from my experience is you don't necessarily want to pick the technical experts. Maybe you want to pick the penultimate technical experts, the deputy experts who have the connections back to those experts, because oftentimes they can work together better. And then finally, I guess an idea about, team formation, depending on the task, its complexity and duration, it might be a good idea to get in some true industrial organizational psychology expertise. Maybe somebody that serves as an ethnographer, who's a professional that's trained to observe behavior in the workplace, particularly team dynamics. And they can assist you in both selecting the team, but also during the team, to provide interventions to make team performance better. I had a fantastic sort of random, I'll call it, experience. I wish I could call it was strategic, to work with an IO psychology PhD student at NASA for a while. And it just gave me a glimpse into a whole new world, a world of, you could call it the science and research and collaboration. And so, yes, I would say collaboration is absolutely both art and science. And, go get some professional help. I think it's funny how we statisticians often don't like it when people try to practice what we think we know best. So go find a professional, to work on it if that particular project it needs that sort of level.
Great, thank you, Pete. Before we transition, Willis or John, any thoughts to add to this one?
Yeah, I'll just add something real quickly, and we're going to maybe touch on this a little bit later, but one of the things I would encourage us to do is not jump to the default. Right? Sometimes there's certain people that you pick over and over again, and it's just the first person that comes to your mind. And the reason for that is the biases that can happen in that process. And if you really want to get more of that innovation or creativity or diversity or things like that in a team that can help make that collaboration more effective, you almost have to set aside sometimes those first kind of snap judgments that come into mind and say, oh, this person would be great, that person would be great. But I also kind of almost want to purposely think about other people that don't immediately come to mind, because oftentimes they can bring a unique perspective or a different perspective to a problem that wouldn't be obvious upfront immediately.
No, that's a great idea. Just I think we're more aware of sort of our biases now, and just choosing the right person has so many different facets. So making that deliberate, I think, really helps. All right. Moving on to the next question. So what human elements are involved to ensure a successful collaboration? So those are some of the softer skills. Now, can you facilitate collaboration, particularly when team members are, some of them are more outspoken than others? Willis, some ideas to kick things off on this topic?
Yeah, I think if I were to maybe summarize it in one word, like Pete tried to do earlier with the earlier question, I would just say assumptions is the word. And when it comes to communication and conversations, it's all about surfacing those assumptions. It's all about understanding the different assumptions that we make, because we all make them. We all have a language and a background and an experience that we're bringing in there. And oftentimes when I see challenges or teams that are having a hard time or individuals that are having a hard time, it's usually because of different assumptions. And people are making that creates that miscommunication, and then it creates a misunderstanding, and then that snowballs into other negative experiences and goes from there. So we really have to be careful on not letting those conversations get derailed because of different assumptions. So you have to challenge and say, okay, if I'm understanding what you're saying, this is what I hear you say, and repeating back to be able to understand the different assumptions that we make. And if we can increase that awareness among the team of those different assumptions, it's usually going to help that human element in there. The other thing I would add in here is when we talk about facilitation, you can get training on it. And Pete talked about kind of, others talked about bringing in a psychologist or other people in there. There are people who are trained in facilitation. Now, you may not necessarily want them there for every meeting and every conversation and every discussion, but if you know there's going to be something critical, maybe you bring in that external help. And it's not a sign of weakness or whatnot. And sometimes we say, oh, because we're technical experts, we can learn anything. But that's not necessarily true. Facilitation skills is something that takes practice and experience and training, just like any other skill we would have in there. So just recognizing that. And so now I've recently kind of moved from a statistician role to HR. HR is full of people with great skills in facilitation, and I've been able to learn and watch and leverage some of those skills into different projects and teams that I'm a part of now, because they're trained to listen, they're trained to do that. And that facilitation is more listening than talking, by the way. So if you want a good facilitator, it's the person who listens the best, not the person who talks the best or is most charismatic and outgoing and all of that. So I would just say, use people that have those skills and bring them in. And then as a team, because you can't necessarily have that person there at every meeting, as a team and as an individual, so to build your own kind of individual facilitation skills. And there's a lot of great resources online and courses and books and articles and things that you can read about that to build that. And that's a way to address some of the outspoken members. That'll be part of good facilitation, is giving everybody a voice in there. And then the last thing I'll just kind of throw out there with it is use the technology. Sometimes people don't participate. They have different styles of communicating, different ways of working. You think of that stereotypical introvert, extrovert type personalities and whatnot. Some people are more comfortable sharing their input offline, not in front of a big group or whatnot. So just providing different venues for that communication. We're giving people a chance to see the agenda or the questions or topics of our discussion up front so they can prepare, providing written ways versus vocal ways, and kind of use the technology to allow for different styles of working and different personalities and whatnot. It's also a great way to help with that collaboration. And a lot of these tools that we're learning in this remote environment today are helping with that and enabling more of that collaboration across time zones and things where you're not necessarily all in the same room at the same time. And it makes it easier to kind of get more of that voice from everyone in the group.
Great. Yeah, some wonderful ideas there, Willis. Pete, some follow-on ideas?
Yeah, I could just say what Willis said. I think he did a great job. I'll give you some other maybe perspectives. Like collaboration, as I read the question, is by definition joining together of human elements. I thought about this. It'd be a lot easier if we had, collaborative autonomous systems. It's the people, it's the humans that are the challenge, right, in this collaboration. And but yet they are, as I've said before, they're the creative, innovative engines to recognize opportunities and solve complex problems. So, I'll reiterate, it takes team members that want to collaborate. You can't be assigned to collaborate, I say. You can be assigned to work on a team, but you have to choose to collaborate. And I think that's something that you want, definitely has got to be a piece of that human element. And I think true collaboration is distinguished by the sharing of mutually agreed objectives. That's been said a couple times by different people. Everybody having the same clear objectives. I think it's important to understand why everyone's on this team and what they want to get out of it. And then you'll know if everybody's really on the team. I think that's a good way to figure that out. But being able to clearly articulate those common objectives, I think is definitely something to be successful, and getting off to the right foot that way. Crucially, it's crucial to do that. So in terms of the outspoken, quote, troublesome team member, I think that was a nice way to say troublesome. I think it's tempting to just vote them off the island. And that may be an easy solution, but it's probably not the best solution. And Willis hit it on this a few minutes ago. I think reversing roles and trying to put yourself in their position and understand where they're coming from. Maybe it's assumptions, maybe it's misunderstandings. I think it's worth the investment to try to figure out where they're coming from, why it appears that they're being so, quote, troublesome or outspoken. And, I think tension and conflict can be very healthy within a collaborative team. Let me say that again. Tension and conflict can be very productive to a point. And then I think it becomes destructive. And, I think that's the challenge, is figuring out where, when you're at that point. You certainly don't want a room full of people that everybody thinks the same way. That's groupthink. And it may be pleasant, but it's not going to generate any innovative new ideas or breakthroughs, right? And that's been mentioned before as well. So I think my advice with that outspoken person is to be patient, try to understand their viewpoint. And if that fails, then I think it falls on the leader, or as Willis has mentioned, the facilitator, to address it in a constructive manner that minimizes the impact or the negative impact on the rest of the team. So there's my thoughts.
That's great, thank you. So when I read this question, I sort of thought to myself, the person I worry about a little bit more is the very quiet person, right? They've got great things in their head, but they may not find a way to sort of get them into the conversation. And so, just finding things on both ends of the spectrum. Maybe you want the noisier person to talk a little less, but sort of advocating for the quiet people, like, well, what are you thinking on this one? That sort of feels like the other side of the coin, where the team could suffer if the wisdom that person has doesn't get into the conversation. All right, any parting thoughts before we move to the next question?
Christine, related to the quiet person, kind of connecting that with what Willis said is like with these virtual tools, I feel like someone that's less inclined to speak up, much more inclined to use the chat box, right? So having those different forums, I think actually facilitates hearing from people that maybe wouldn't speak out quite as often in an in-person environment. So being able to balance that, I think would help that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, the last question in this section on process: what do we wish subject matter experts would do to help support successful collaboration? John, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure, thank you, Christine. I think there's at least a couple things that we could do here to improve collaboration. I'll kind of preface my answer by saying a lot of the people that I collaborate, all the people I collaborate with are tremendously smart, intelligent people. It's just kind of like what Willis said. I think we're all walking around with a wildly different set of assumptions. And I think for that reason, it's very important when you're talking with subject matter experts to break things down. When you're eliciting information from experts, you need to start from first principles, even before first principles, because a statistician's first principles are not the same thing as a physicist's first principles. So you have to break things down to grade school. And like Sarah said, I think you have to get rid of jargon, okay? Because the statisticians are using all the same words that the physicists are using, but they're using them in a different way. So we need to speak in simple language. And I think that we need to start with simple examples, start from first principles, try to give the statistician or the outside consultant some ideas, some very, very basic skills before you kind of get into the full complexity of the problem that you're trying to solve. So those two things are pretty important. And I also think there's a third thing here going on, especially when we have subject matter experts that are interfacing with statisticians. And I think that we should just recognize that statisticians can't answer all data questions. And data plus statistics doesn't mean decision making. So decision making is kind of like a separate thing. So a statistician is not a guy that can just come in and like solve your data problems and then walk away. They need more than that. And statisticians also have to be willing to learn about data from subject matter experts. Everybody is a little bit of a data scientist. So we statisticians, we have to be willing to learn new things about data from the subject matter experts as well. Because truthfully, they know just as much about data as we know. We just learned about it in a slightly different way. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to kind of cross-pollinate, especially when it comes to data. And so I think that's enough for that one. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we all know different things about the data, and we want that superset of knowledge surrounding the data to be in play. Sarah, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just expand a little bit on what John was saying. So one of the challenges that I've seen with some of the teams I work on is kind of diving into the deep end a little too soon, right? Which I think is what John was getting a little bit at is, you've got a lot of the key and gory details of how some of these systems work or how the test ranges work or how a certain test goes through. And oftentimes when you're first meeting and working with the team, it's like, we're not there yet, right? So I think part of it is we do want that knowledge, right? We do want that knowledge, but we want to wait for it, right? So I think one of the ways to help from both sides is just to lay out expectations, which is what John was getting at a little bit of like, here, we're going to start with this. Let's make sure the objective is clear and we understand, and then we'll start easing our way into the gory details so we can get at the information we need. So that would be one thing that I think we just have to, sometimes you have to remind the team as a whole of going off on the tangents, right? On these very deep dive topics. It's like, that's important, but maybe not right now. And we need to come back to it at when it's more appropriate. The other part, and I think this goes to the communication side, is, and not just that we're not speaking in a technical jargon, but the way that we communicate and how we present maybe our subject matter expertise. So I think a lot of people in the defense world, we rely a lot on PowerPoint, right? And it can be a very useful tool, but it can also really dissuade conversation and questions, right? So trying to find a balance of, having some visuals, but that kind of facilitates everyone else asking questions to better understand. So I would like to try us all to try to find better ways to communicate and kind of have these more open discussions and communication on the different system, knowledge and things like that. And from the stat side as well, right? How can we do it without, having a million PowerPoint slides? How can we make it more of an open discussion so that we have the questions and we actually learn more?
Great. So we're at the second sort of end of that chunk. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. And maybe while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll just throw it out for Pete and Willis. If you have any comments on anything related to process, we can go from there.
I think I learned a lot. So I think it was well covered. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. So it doesn't look like we have any questions, and we have about 15 minutes left. So maybe we'll continue on and try to save a little bit at the end for final questions. All right, so final thoughts. Describe a collaboration experience that was not successful. I think many of us have, on the learning curve of getting better at collaboration, have had some of those experiences. What lessons did you learn from that experience, and what have you done, or what would you plan to do differently to try to mitigate some of those less than ideal interactions? So Pete, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to say I couldn't think of one, but that wouldn't really be true, would it? So, this is the good, the bad, and the ugly of collaboration. This is going to be the ugly part. So the worst experience, when I look back, not successful. It was early in my career. I wish I could say it was very early in my career, but it wasn't. I was a freshly minted PhD statistician, should have been caged, not let loose. And I was asked to join a team working on a research measurement system for the Mars Curiosity rover. Asked to join is not quite correct. The team was not doing well, and I was sent in to provide, quote, technical rigor. Yeah, regrettably, that set my initial entrance. That was my mission assignment for the team. And so I elevated technical correctness, if you want to call it that, well above, building team relationships. Technical dominance, actually, is what I was going for. And, I didn't spend time trying to build the trust and get mutual relationships. And I walked into a mess, but that's not an excuse for my performance. I got to tell you that when I look back. So after I realized that they weren't enamored with my PhD and my far superior skill set, in my humble opinion, I began to feel threatened and belittled. When my opinions and ideas weren't heard, actually mean when they weren't enthusiastically embraced. And rather than trying to understand the criticism and figure out how to present my ideas better, like we've just heard a lot about, I just didn't take that path. I just took it personally, and I took it, let the games begin. And so I don't want you to hear that I'm making nice is my goal. That's not necessarily the objective in all circumstances. It's not. Team members can and should be technically disrespectful while being personally respectful. Those two they're not mutually exclusive of each other. And, no matter how much I like you and I want to collaborate with you, 2 + 2 is not 5. It's just not. We're not going there. So to do that, it requires this, personal trust to being able to have that technically disrespectful engagement while remaining, personally respectful. So in the end, my technical ideas did win the day. How's that for a lousy explanation of collaboration? But that's how I felt, right? And I won the battle, but I lost the war. We accomplished the mission. We advanced the technology. But there was very little follow-on work. And in one of Willis's early comments, he said, would you do it again? Once again, Willis somehow read my thoughts about what was coming. That was, to me, that was a major sign of failure of collaboration, that there was very little follow-on work. What did I learn? I learned that I could be technically right and fail at collaboration. Who knows what broader kind of impact I could have had with that team if I had developed longer term relationships. Collaboration is not a one-off event. Going back to what Willis said, would you do it again? And especially in my organization where there's very little turnover, folks are around for a long time, you're going to see them again. And those relationships you build on one team, will impact the rest of your career. And I think having that perspective would be very healthy, to take that longer term view than just the team task that's in front of you. So there's my story. Not a pretty one, but I did learn.
So I always think we learn an awful lot from hearing sort of stories where everything didn't go right. And, I think your point of you want to be invited to the next project so you can contribute there, that's part of the long-term success. Willis, some ideas on this one?
Yeah, I think I would say I've probably had similar experiences of what Pete describes, and many of us have had those. And I go back to what Pete was saying earlier. Complexity is what creates a need for collaboration. And so what makes it not successful is not being aware of that complexity or not responding appropriately to that complexity. And that complexity can be all kinds of dimensions. I think of one project I did where we were working and there was a clear target, clear scope, great team, talented people, a compelling business case, and all of this stuff. But there were other things that got in the way of competing priorities and people on too many projects, not being able to get the data that we needed for the project, or not having the systems in place to collect that data. The organizational complexity in terms of who's in there. So there's complexity in a lot of different forms in there, and unless you tackle them all, the collaboration is not going to be successful. So it really just comes to being aware of that complexity and recognizing that complexity in the different places and being able to address that appropriately is the way I would kind of think of that differently.
Oh, that's great. So we have about 7 minutes left. So I think I may stop with the questions, sort of progressing through the questions that we had laid out. We did have a question come in that I think sort of latches onto some of the things we talked about. Do you have any specific suggestions for quiet people, or perhaps those who are new to their role, to successfully have their voice heard in large group meetings where often a handful of extrovert or leaders dominate the conversation? This seems challenging if there isn't a formal facilitator. And so thoughts on sort of how to get your foot in the door if you have something good to be said, because I think that is something that many of us have struggled with over the years.
Oh, I'll go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say, I've got a couple quick comments. I guess one is, it's changing your view, your perspective. Do you feel like you should be in the room at that table? Do you feel like you should be heard? Do you feel like you should be treated as an equal like other disciplines sitting there? I think if your perspective is one that I don't know if I really belong here, it's probably going to come across that way. So I think it's an ingoing perspective. And then my second quick comment is practice. Just practice. Figure out ways to practice. And you don't have to be a social butterfly to be a good collaborator in our technical settings. That's not exactly the same thing. It's really being able to understand other people, work together, and have your ideas heard, and that just takes practice.
Sarah, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I'll chime in because I can relate to this question. When I graduated and I started my job, my job title at the Stat COE is stat expert, and I come in freshly minted with my PhD, and I definitely don't feel that way, right? So what Pete said about internal confidence is a big part of it, and I think you'll learn it as you are more experienced in your job. But two thoughts that come to mind. So one, if it's an initial collaboration and you're kind of new to the team, one thing that I try to do is maybe I stay quiet for a while until I find kind of that nugget of opportunity, or I find a quick win, right, where I can make a contribution. So like they're really stuck on something and I have a quick win idea. That's when I can chime in, and I feel like you'll have more value, from the other team members. The other thing, if it's kind of recurring meetings or a recurring team, is try to find maybe like a personal champion on the team. Maybe it is the team lead, right? And you reach out to them ahead of time saying, I do have some thoughts on this topic, and try to get a champion for yourself, to try to be able to have someone reach out. I think Christine mentioned earlier with a quiet person in the room, like specifically calling on them, right? So if you could find a champion on a team that could do something similar to help you, I don't see a reason why that wouldn't, why not give that a try? But I think practice also is it's just experience after a certain point. So, just having the courage to be able to speak up, you just kind of get a little bit more comfortable with it as you go. At least that was my experience.
That's great. So I'll latch on to something that Willis suggested earlier, that also just use some of those other channels. If it's hard to speak up, then maybe use the chat box, or, outside of the meeting, talk to someone and say, do you think that's a good idea? Should I bring it up? And so then they'll help you find that opportunity. So I think different things. All right, one more question. We do have time for it. In the age of online collaborations, do you think VR and AR is a useful technology for implementing more widely for things like DataWorks? What about T&E meetings in general? Are there other online tools that can be helpful for collaboration? So I know what VR is, virtual reality. I don't know what AR is.
I'm sure, alternate reality or something like that. So I guess one thing I was thinking about there is think about what's happening with knowledge. So if I want to fix my car, or I gotta fix something around my house, I can Google it and find a YouTube video for just about anything that helped me fix something, right? And so I think about, obviously there's some of this stuff that we work on that's sensitive and that you couldn't just put out on YouTube, but there's some general kind of principles and thoughts. I think it's probably going to get more and more common. Just yesterday, I was working in some software tools and was stuck on something. I Googled it and found a 7-minute YouTube video that somebody had posted on there that was exactly what I needed, kind of solve the problem that I was working through. So it's going to get easier to do that, and the challenge is going to be that information overload, and how do we be able to filter through that to find what's relevant for what you need, and so that it's not enough to just get all that content out there, but it's to be able to sift through that content appropriately to match. And that's where I think some of the technology of even some of the machine learning kind of algorithms and things like that can get better over time to be able to find that content that you need is relevant.
Great. So I'm just going to jump ahead one slide. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about collaboration, this is a paper that was in Quality Engineering in 2019. And so Pete Lulu, an associate professor of statistics at the University of South Florida, and I were involved in this. But you'll notice that we had a stellar group of panelists. And so it's a really nice collection of work with lots of different opinions and lots of different insights about collaboration. So that might be a follow-up if you want to learn more about this topic. And we've got about a minute left, so I'll throw it back to the panel to just see if they have some parting thoughts for the audience.
I think, on the question about VR and AR and communication, I think that the gurus out in Silicon Valley are just going to continue to surprise us with new ways to interact and communicate with each other. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. Maybe VR and AR aren't going to catch on, but I don't think we'll have screens forever. So something will come along that will change the way that we collaborate with each other. The pandemic has already been a massive, massive shift in how we work together. And I think the pandemic is going to have some long-term effects on our work, but I don't think this is the end of it. So,
Good insights. Thanks, John.